Today's topic is state formation and nation building. And I try to compare processes of state formation and nation building in European history and of course also in the history of North America, which means the US and Canada in particular. And what are the different conceptualizations of the meaning of the term state and nation in European history, and how did this influence also the American Revolution in 1776 and the secession of the 13 American colonies from the British monarchy, and creating first a confederation, and finally after the war with British troops and the successful war against British troops, then the foundation of the United States of America under a new constitution from 1787. So between 1776 and 1787 you have the model of a confederation, and also a very important legal document, the so-called Articles of Confederation. And of course the overall question is, how do these basic concepts, state, nation and society, in the end fit together? And as you remember probably from the previous classes, it is one of the most important premises of liberal theories of democracy that there is a separation between state and society. And of course this means, how do you relate also state and society, and what is therefore also in the tradition of Western philosophical thinking, the relationship between a society and a nation. Is society and nation identical? Is it? Can you exchange these terms? Also, when you look into it from a perspective of liberal ideology, what makes the difference? So this is what I want to try to elaborate a little bit more in detail with historic developments. So we'll go a little bit into history and geography to get an overview. The first, however, system of classification is more than 2,000 years old, developed by Aristotle in the 4th century before Christ, when he was studying the statutes of so-called Greek city-states. So there was never a Greek state in the modern sense of the term state. But you had so-called city-states, and the two most important city-states, Athens and Sparta. And Athens and Sparta were rivals, political rivals, and of course military rivals, who will have the dominance, the hegemony within the network of these Greek city-states. And the famous saying of the Thucydides trap, now developed for the relationship between the US and China, comes from this ancient history, because of the rivalry between Sparta and Athens. So Sparta was the rising power and Athens was the old power. And the historian Thucydides said, if you have a rising power which wants to replace the dominant power, the dominant hegemon, then there is no way out but war. So this is the explanation for the Peloponnesian War by Thucydides, and this was taken over then by political scientists in the United States also to give a look into the crystal ball for the future. Is it possible to have a balance of power between the United States and China, or does history repeat itself in terms of the Thucydides trap? And therefore Aristotle, however, was an empiricist. He did what we also usually do as constitutional lawyers. He compared constitutions, these statutes of the cities, and he found out there are altogether, from more than 50 statutes of city-states, 6 categories categories of statutes. And he classified these statutes along the vertical axis, the empirical axis here, how many people rule. So it's a quantifiable criteria. So it's like modern empirical social sciences, quantifying, using a quantifying criterion. One person, a few people, basically a few families, the leaders of a few families, or the majority of the people on the ground. And the majority of the people on the ground, which is, of course, not to forget, is only the free male citizens. So the majority refers not to women and not to foreigners who have a right of residence in the city-state. And of course, the real majority were slaves. Again, not included into the majority here. So in reality, you have quite a small minority in quantitative terms called the majority here by Aristotle. And secondly, as you can see, he uses a normative classification distinguishing between legitimate forms of government and corrupt forms of government. And therefore you have the analogy, if there is one person in power as a monarch, then this is the legitimate form, whereas a tyrant is the corrupt form of government. And the same is true for aristocracy, oligarchy, and as you can see here, democracy is a corrupt form of government for ancient Greek philosophers, meaning basically chaos. So it's another word for chaos. Everybody is doing what he wants. The pupils are no longer listening to teachers. The children are no longer listening to their parents. So no loyalty and no relationships of trust and community and cooperation any longer. So these are the 6 typical forms of government, and this Aristotelian scheme of taxonomy of classification has been used in political philosophy in the West until the very day. So when I described illiberal democracy last time, concerning Bosnia-Herzegovina, how would you now find my illiberal democracy? Where do you find illiberal democracy here? When I spoke always, you have 6 parties forming a cartel of power, which is working for their own pockets, the party leaders, but not for the common good of the people on the ground.
Oligarchy?
Yeah, exactly. So it's oligarchy. Cartel of power means oligarchy, in the same way as this was used by Aristotle.
Can I ask? Did Aristotle say which one out of 3 legitimate forms is best, or were they equally fine for him? So monarchy, aristocracy, polity. Is polity better than aristocracy? Is aristocracy better than monarchy?
The worst form is tyranny. Yeah? For Aristotle and all the Greek philosophers, and also in the medieval ages, yeah, in Catholic theology and political philosophy, the worst form is always tyranny. And then you have, of course, not really a distinction between oligarchy and aristocracy. The Republic of Venice in the medieval age was an oligarchic system composed of the leaders of some 200 families. But nevertheless it was considered, because it was not a monarchy but a republican form of government with an elected leader, the Doge, on top of the government, to be an aristocratic form of government because of the election through 200 people. And what is the meaning of polity is, of course, to say, well, there is a funeral speech when one of the heroes of these Greek battles died, by Thucydides, and he explains what is the meaning of, basically, of a good form of government. It is first and above all freedom, but not negative freedom in the meaning everybody can do whatever he wants, but positive freedom, that you are part of the community, that you have some sort of a community on the ground where the people work together for the benefit of all citizens. And freedom and solidarity are basically the basic values for the polity. And when you look into Greek history, then you have again the historian Thucydides, who said throughout Greek history you have a loop. It starts with monarchy as a good form of government, is replaced by aristocracy, and aristocracy is replaced by oligarchy. The oligarchy ends up in democracy, and then you will have a revolution bringing to the fore a tyrant to again re-establish the state power, what we would call today the state power, political stability. And you see, there is no absolute dichotomy, but you have a cycle in the end. This brings me already to the next 1,500 years, into the middle of or the end of the 15th and beginning of the 16th century, where you see, I hope you can read it, what I call here the age of discoveries. Here you have a very small ship, a 3-mast ship, with Christopher Columbus discovering India, what he believed to be India here in the Caribbean, in Haiti, landed in Haiti. And then you have the Portuguese with Vasco da Gama starting here, and through 80 years of voyages, then again and again came always further south, and then again along the east coast of Africa arrived India. And what is completely unknown in Western history textbooks is that you have also a Chinese admiral, Zheng He, with his fleet coming from here and also reaching the east coast of Africa. And this is the comparison of the ships. These are the ships of the Jang-he fleet, yeah, and these are the tiny little boats of the Portuguese and in the end also French explorers here in the Dominican Republic, Cuba, Haiti, or going to Canada to the Ontario stream.
As compared to the technology, preserving and making the dish.
And this is now a map of Europe. And my question is that you should make an educated guess. What century can you see here from the map? When was the map drawn? And what you can see here is my effort to demonstrate this theory of three phases, historical phases and regions, territorially speaking. And this is true for today. This is the basic structure of European history, the starting point. Austria.
Empire.
Yeah.
The Habsburg Empire, because the name Austria is not used until 1918.
Yeah.
But it is called the monarchy of Austria-Hungary since 1867. But here is no, you see here is no division between the German-speaking parts and the Hungarian-speaking parts. Yeah? So you have three empires in the east. And what do you see in the middle? But you see the kingdom of Prussia, the kingdom of, here, the blue, the kingdom of Bavaria, a country created at the end of the 30 Years' War in Europe in 1648, which is Switzerland. Yeah? Switzerland did not exist before 1648. And do you see Italy? Do you see Germany? No, exactly. You have a plethora of different forms of government and territorial size in the middle. What is today called Germany, you have kingdoms, Prussia, Bavaria, but you have also city-states, the Hanse city-states, Bremen and Hamburg, which are left over from the medieval ages, also this trading route, the Hanse cities, in the here for the North Sea, reaching to St. Petersburg. And instead of Italy, you see here again the kingdom of Sicily, the Grand Duchy of Florence, and the Republic of Venice as a city-state, and all the other tiny principalities and what else. So this is the basic structure at the beginning of the 19th century. Three regions and three different developments in terms of unification to achieve political unity. And an empire like the Habsburg Empire was composed of 7 to 10 major nationalities. So you had Italian speakers, you had German speakers, you had Hungarian speakers, you had Romanian speakers, you had of course the Slovene speakers, and also very small nationalities, as you would call it today, like Ruthenians. Nobody knows any longer the name Ruthenian, This was the name for the Ukrainians under the Habsburg Empire. So they were not called Ukraine, but Ruthenians. The eastern part of today's Ukraine was part of the Habsburg Empire, not the Russian Empire. Okay, then let's go ahead. This is again the next map, showing you today's situation, which is the consequence of nation-state formation according to the Matryoshka principle. And after World War I, the empires were destroyed, the Eastern empires, and new nation-states created. And you see here the new nation-states, in particular Poland, but also Czechoslovakia. Yeah, this was one. The Czech Republic and Slovakia were the Czechoslovak Republic, created in 1918. Hungary created in 1918, which is only 1/3 of the territory of Hungary, after World War I. Hungary was also reduced in its territorial outreach. And what you cannot see here any longer is Yugoslavia, created initially as Kingdom of Serbs, Croats and Slovenes, and renamed in 1927 into the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. And then you have, of course, Bulgaria, Romania and Turkey. And what happened, therefore, as you can see here, in 1989, 1990, 1991, according to the Matryoshka principle, even the binational federations, the Czechoslovak Republic, separated into two sovereign states peacefully in 1992. Yugoslavia disappears, and you have the former Yugoslav republics as new nation states. And what you can see here is that Montenegro and Kosovo still belong to what is called in 1992 the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, which is composed only of Serbia and Montenegro. Still including, however, Kosovo, and Kosovo declares independence in 2008. So this is the Matryoshka principle, that due to separation, secession, and separation, also peaceful separation between the Czech and the Slovak Republic, without any referendum, without any parliamentary debate, on the basis of a letter of the two prime ministers. They simply separated. And people accepted that separation and said, yeah, okay, fine. We are two states now, no longer one common state, And then, of course, you have all the events here with the independence of the Baltic states, Lithuania, for instance, here in the north with Riga, but also Ukraine and Belarus and Moldavia. Okay, why do I really attack in my argumentation with the comparison with the Matryoshka principle, the nation-state development? Because you see, I present this in a very critical way. This brings me to the next map. What is the underlying premise of each and every nation-state? when you look into this map. What you can recognize here, for instance, in France, you have people not speaking French. In the Bretagne, they still have a Gaelic language, but they also speak in Ireland and in parts of Scotland. And when you look into Spain, you see here the Basque country, where they speak a language and nobody knows. This is incomparable. There is no language family. The Basque language does not belong to any language family. They are completely different and nobody knows where it comes from, until the very day. And here you have Catalonia. They are speaking Catalan, which is very similar to Spanish. But nevertheless, the Catalans say, no, this is not a dialect. We speak our own language, a different language. And we feel discriminated against in the Spanish state, and therefore the two political parties in Spain, from this Catalan region, claimed independence for Catalonia, and Mr. Puigdemont, the leader of one of these Catalan parties, also tried to enforce a referendum on independence, and this was criminalized, and he had to flee the country. So he was a refuge in Brussels. He lived for almost 10 years as a refugee in Brussels. And what you see here is a very tiny mark, which is South Tyrol, a region in today's Italy, where you have a majority in the region with German speakers. And they have a special autonomy statute under the Italian constitution, guaranteeing them self-government, political self-government, and linguistic instruction in their mother tongue. And in difference from all the other Italian regions, they get 95% of the taxes collected in South Tyrol back for their budget. All other Italian regions get only 60% back from the taxes collected. So you see, the tax privilege is also thought as an instrument for economic development, to help economic development, because South Tyrol was traditionally an agrarian country. No industry, nothing. And this brings me now to the models you will find in Austria and North America. How do you combine state and nation? State always in the modern meaning of state, not the ancient Greek city-state, but the modern state, according to the definition of Max Weber we had been talking about. To control a territory, to have one people, the nation, and to exercise full control over territory and people. So, in Europe, as I said before, in the beginning of the 17th century, you have a 30 years religious war between the Catholic countries and the Protestant countries. Between 1618 and 1648, and ends with the famous Westphalian Treaty. So the Westphalian treaties, which are thought to be the European model, are in itself based on this treaty almost 100 years before, the so-called Augsburg religious peace settlement between Catholics and Protestants, after the Latin phrase cuius regio eius religio. So the prince or the duke, yeah, governing a municipality, a region, a principality, yeah, has a right to decide which language and which religion can be used by the population. If this means in actual practice, all the Protestants, having lived in Styria, had to, in the northern part of Styria, around the region of Schladming, where she is going for skiing all the time, during the winter holidays, yeah, had to flee, yeah, were expelled. And some of these Protestants went what is today Romania, yeah, and became linguistic minority in what is today Romania. And in the 19th century, this idea of who has the control of the territory, also decides on the religion, was taken over also for language aspects. Yeah? So that you can say, well, the 19th century as the century of nationalism in Europe, developed the phrase cuius regio eius lingua, the language, where you see that Switzerland, Belgium, Bosnia and Herzegovina, yeah, today, but also Quebec in Canada, yeah, follow this rule. Yeah. Who is in possession of the territory and controls as a government the territory will decide on the language, on the official language to be spoken. With the American Revolution in 1776, and in particular the first amendment of the US Constitution of 1891, you will see immediately that there is a strict prohibition already, yeah, due to the history, yeah, of the colonialists leaving Great Britain as religious dissidents, fleeing to America, founding the new colonies in North America, that Congress, the Parliament, shall make no law respecting the establishment of one religion. Great Britain is, of course, the example, because you have the Anglican Church as the only official church, represented in Parliament in the House of Lords. House of Lords. So the Archbishop of Canterbury and 3 other archbishops of the Anglican Church are ex officio, members of the House of Lords to this very day. So you see this very old system of feudalism in Marxist terminology, still alive in Great Britain to this very day. And what is, however, confusing with regard to Europe is that the strict separation of state and church does not mean that you have also a separation of state and religion, or politics and religion. It's exactly the other way around. Yeah? Think of the Tea Party movement, over the last 2 decades within the Republican Party in the United States. So that these religious movements within American politics play a very, very strong role, both on the side of the Republican Party as well as the Democratic Party. John F. Kennedy was the first Catholic president. Before you had only Protestant presidents. So, therefore, I draw a general conclusion the separation of state and ethnicity in terms of language and religion. Whenever I talk about ethnicity, the background is either language or religion as cultural markers. And ethnicity as such is nothing else but the argument that all people who speak one language or who speak or belong to one religion form one community, one closed community, so that you become formally, officially a member of this community. This is called by Max Weber again, social closure. So ethnicity is not a property of my person, and ethnicity must not be confused with language and religion. But if you form closed communities on the basis of language or religion, as you have it in Belgium, not only in Bosnia, then this is an ethnic community, an ethnic group. You do no longer call it a language group. So the Belgian constitution until the very day calls it language groups in parliament. But due to the closed communities and the strict borderlines in linguistic terms and in institutional terms in Belgium, the language groups are in reality ethnic communities, represented also in the state bodies. So the final conclusion I draw from this slide is you see separation of state and ethnicity, and you have an official constitutional ideology. Again, a provocation hopefully for you, because for legal positivists, I'm a traitor, when it's called a constitutional ideology, because law is neutral. Come on, law is never neutral, but enshrines values and therefore also ideologies. And what you have in the US is the official doctrine developed after the Civil War in the beginning of the 20th century with the acts of emancipation of Afro-Americans, no longer being slaves, but have to get political equality. Nevertheless, voting rights were not given to the Afro-Americans until 1965. And until the very day, the judgments of the Supreme Court argued, no, the American Constitution is a color-blind constitution. So race and the criterion of race does not matter in constitutional education, which is of course not true, in my opinion, because I'm not a strict legal positivist. And insofar you have a similar phenomenon in France. France calls itself a laïc republic. A laïc republic, and the principle of laïcité in the constitution can be found not only in France as a consequence of the French Revolution, but also in Turkey. So when Turkey was re-established after the breakdown of the Ottoman Empire in 1922 as a laïc republic after the model of France, they included also the principle of laïcité in the constitution, so that women were not allowed to wear a headscarf any longer in public, in particular not in the educational system, until a few years ago. Only since a few years, the development has changed in Turkey, so that women are now allowed also to wear a headscarf in the public educational system. And in 1919, so it was really neutral, because men were no longer allowed to wear a beard. All men had to shave their beards in 1922 and were no longer allowed to wear the fez as the traditional cap of Muslims. So this was the famous leader of the Turkish Republic from 1922, Atatürk. And therefore you have then two additional models, not strict separation, but the Marxist idea, theoretical idea, that with the withering away of the state, in communism, as a classless society, also cultural diversity and cultural differences will no longer play a role. And Marx himself wrote because he was a journalist by profession, wrote in several articles, these small people like the Slovenes we had in the Habsburg Empire, they will be swallowed up by the bigger people. They will be assimilated, basically. So only bigger people with several million people will survive, so to speak. So you see also the social Darwinist idea in the background of the Marxist theoretical issues, but in practice, the withering away of the state has never been put into practice. But what Dr. Radchenkova will tell you next time, after the Bolshevik Revolution in 1972 and the foundation of the Soviet Union, the Soviet Union is based on the idea of an ethno-national federation. What this means in practice, against the ideas of the Habsburg Marxists, Karl Renner and Otto Bauer, which argued that it is not possible to territorialize ethnicity, because in Central Europe and in Eastern Europe, people are completely intermingled. Separation would mean that you have to expel hundreds of thousands of people from the territory. Therefore, he said not territorial autonomy, but cultural autonomy will be the solution. To give people a right to cultural self-government, to decide for themselves which will be what will be the language of instruction in the public educational system, for instance, in terms of cultural self-government. But as you will hear next week much more about that, in practice this was ethno-national federalism, not only in the Soviet Union, but then also after 1945 in the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, SFRJ, in the acronym, in the Czechoslovak Republic, and in my opinion also the People's Republic of China. Why this is the case you can discuss with me in 2 weeks, because I will not be here next week. I have to participate in a panel discussion in Vienna about 30 years of Dayton Agreement and what was going wrong in Bosnia. So, and finally, you see, this is Bosnia, the model of constitutional democracy. How do we combine state and nation in a democratic system through the legal institutionalization of Druze, Christians and Muslims recognized in the Constitution and represented in Parliament. Or also you have a president, a prime minister, and
exactly.
the prosecutor.
Head of parliament.
Head of parliament. Okay.
Each one should be from the different religion.
So that you have highest offices in the state, to be taken over by members of different groups.
Yeah, the Sunni, Shia, and Christians.
Yeah. Okay. This brings me. We are very good in time. This brings me now to the next question, namely territory. Now we have been talking about people, nation, state and nation, and now we talk about state and territory. How can you combine state and territory? And this is the short history of territorial arrangements in Europe, where you can see 2 or 3 developments. First one, in the western part of Europe, Great Britain, France, Spain, you had from the very beginning unitary states after the medieval ages. So Great Britain and France here are highlighted as the examples for the establishment of unitary states, where you have developments already in the late medieval ages, where a kingdom and the king exercises full sovereign power, absolute power. Therefore, I had spoken to you at the very beginning of this lecture series already of absolutist monarchism. And the French king Louis XIV is seen as the symbol of this monarchic absolutism to this very day, called the king of the sun. He is compares himself with the sun, and he said, what is the state? Or who is the state? Le roi, c'est moi. I am the state. I am in person the state. So this is the basic idea of monarchic absolutism, that the king embodies, not only represents, but physically embodies the state. And then you have the complete different development with the 2 examples of Switzerland and the US. As I already mentioned, after the American Revolution, you have the confederation of the American colonies before they transformed themselves from a confederation into a federal state, the United States of America. And the same happens in Switzerland in the middle of the 19th century. Despite of the fact that the number plates of Swiss cars always includes the acronym for Switzerland, CH, and CH means Confederatio Helvetica. They still use the name today, But since 1848, after again a very short civil war, because the Catholic cantons had seceded from Switzerland, they transformed the Confederation into a federal state with 20 cantons, subdivided into 20 cantons with more or less different sizes. And basically you have therefore a small majority of German-speaking population, around 65% of German-speaking, another 28% French-speaking in the west, Geneva, and then you have in the south Ticino, the canton of Ticino, where you have the majority Italian speakers, and in the very middle you have also a canton or two cantons where people speak 3 languages. And this is a Greco-Roman language, which is an old Latin, modernized Latin language, which is used as a minority language also in Italy, for instance in South Tyrol and in Giulia Venezia. And then in the last 3 decades you have also a development that the unitary state Belgium, founded in 1831, transformed itself into a federal state. So since 1993, after 6 constitutional reforms, Belgium is no longer a unitary but a central state, sorry, a federal state, yeah, composed, institutionally and territorially composed of 3 regions and 3 linguistic communities. They call them under the very officially linguistic communities. I always say to them, well, come on, you are ethnic groups. Yeah? And then professors from Belgium really accuse me that I'm a provocateur. Yeah? And in this respect, you have the territories, yeah? The Flemish region, where they speak a dialect of Dutch, and the French-speaking region in the south and the Flemish in the north. And the region around Brussels is a bilingual region, officially bilingual region, and the 3 communities is not. Brussels is not a community, but you have also a German-speaking population in the eastern part of Belgium with 3 or 4 municipalities only, territorially speaking, but the German community exercises also cultural self-government, not territorial but cultural self-government, having its own president, its own prime minister, a government and administration, but not the judiciary. Judiciary remains federal. But what they have is the most interesting and most diverse system of public education. And you have 6 different forms of public education where the parents of children can choose. Do they want to send their children to French only speaking schools, German schools, only Flemish speaking schools, and then you have of course the religious divide. Yeah? The private schools are either Protestant or Catholic, and then you have, and this is also only Protestant, only Catholic, and then you have of course the official public schools, yeah, where you can have bilingual education and of course secular, neither Protestant nor Catholic influence in the school system. And it works very well.
That's good, I guess.
In contrast, yeah, to the schools which we have here in Austria. Yeah. You could tell much more from your experience. Yeah? And for reasons of time, I do not go any longer into regionalism, yeah? Because I really want to explicate the method, the methodological background. Yeah? How do we construct categories? And how do we therefore classify US, France, Russia, China in comparison to each other? So you see, the usual method of classification is to establish a continuum of types of regimes so that you have 2 extreme poles. And what you can see here in terms of territorial division of countries, you have the extreme pole, unitary state on the one hand, central state on the one hand, and not federal state as the opposite. This is the big mistake. Very often federalism and centralism is seen as dichotomy, excluding each other. My argument, no, this is a categorical fallacy. When you look into what we really have on the ground, now I'm playing Aristotle here, as you can see. What we really have on the ground, when looking into the history and development of history, is unity state and confederation. So that the federal state is some sort already of a mix, an in-between model between the central state and the confederation. And the funny thing is here with the name and the term highlighted in red, a state union. Which country is a state union? There is no country which calls itself a state union in Europe, but this type is the invention of the judges of the German Federal Constitutional Court. Germany, in terms of European integration, argues for more than 4 decades now that Germany is and remains a sovereign state despite of European integration, and has nevertheless concluded several treaties over the course of the last 50 years. And the final, almost final treaty was the Maastricht Treaty from 1993, when the formerly called European communities of coal and steel, the economic community and Euratom, these were the 3 European communities, transformed themselves under the name of European Union to have one common architecture. No longer 3 different sectorially differentiated treaties, but one common political architecture, the European Union, and representatives from the federal entity of Bavaria went to the Federal Constitutional Court and said, now we have given up sovereignty. This is not allowed according to the German constitution. You, the federal judges, have to decide whether Germany is still a sovereign state, yes or no. And in the end, you can see the linguistic art of adjudication. Is adjudication science or is it art? Jurisprudence. Legal sciences and jurisprudence are very often seen as 2 different fields of activity. Kelsen argued always jurisprudence has nothing to do with legal sciences. This is simply political decision making. Judges decide on the basis of political decisions. This was his very special theory of positive law, but I will not go into the details any longer because we have in the 3 classes in January much more time to discuss that. What is legal positivism and what types of legal positivism lead you to such terminology. And in this respect, to come back to the point, the judges said, different. Germany does not want to exclude itself from European integration and the progress in European integration, but of course the European Union is no longer a confederation. However, the European Union is also not a federal state, because as soon as the European Union is a federal state, you would have the United States of Europe. And this is what the German judges and most politicians in Germany want to prevent. So Germany must remain a sovereign state. So you have to find and linguistic compromise. And the linguistic compromise was that they said, no, European integration, the European Union after the Maastricht Treaty is neither a confederation nor a federal state, but a state union, something in between. And they give no definition what they mean by state union. So this is the reason why I'm allowed to criticize this judgment, to say, well, this is an obvious political compromise made in order to avoid a strict decision, yes or no, against the claim of the Bavarian representatives before the court. Okay, this is the methodological approach. You see, I have nothing learned since, in addition to that, I still use Aristoteles. And in order to make my final argument here is why should we believe in federalism instead of a unitary central state? And these are the arguments for the added value of federalism. So French lawyers will never agree with me well, lawyers from Great Britain will say, oh, come on. We don't see it this way. But this is the perspective of a federal lawyer. To say, what is the alternative? Either centralism or anarchy in practice. And is therefore, now you see my normative argument coming from Aristoteles, empirically or normatively making a value judgment. If you have one center of political power, this means domination, political domination, because I'm, as a Slovene speaker in Austria, in a minority position. I do not have the same life chances as a Slovene speaker in Austria, with an overwhelming German-speaking majority. I'm not really a Slovene speaker, just as a hypothetical figure. And if I'm in a minority position, speaking another language or adhering to another religion, I will be discriminated against. My identity will not be recognized in public, and I have only a chance either to leave the country as a Slovene speaker, then therefore to change my citizenship and go to Slovenia, or I assimilate into the German-speaking population. My grandparents, by the way, were Slovene speakers. I'm the third generation completely assimilated. What is the other possibility? Anarchy means civil war. Bellum omnia contra omnes is the famous phrase from Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan. That everybody will fight everybody for it in order to impose his interests on the others. There are no limitations in the exercise of power. This is the Leviathan, where he says, in order to avoid civil war, you need an absolutist monarch, one person in power, who can suppress all the different interests, cleavages. And there are in an anarchic system, you have no rules, no positive law, no constitution, and therefore no judicial review. So again, self-management was therefore the very idea of Yugoslav communism, in opposition to the Soviet communist system, and they tried exactly to build up a communist system on the basis of self-management. If anybody is interested, I can go into the details, because I wanted to write a PhD on the Yugoslav self-management system when I was a student at Munich University. So I have studied Yugoslavia very, very intensively, the Yugoslav communist system, but for the moment it's enough to say, well, this idea was really taken seriously in the Yugoslav communist system, and also institutionalized. therefore, you see the compromise formulas here. There is one center of power, the domination of one nation. And therefore you have in federalism the idea of shared sovereignty. It's not one man, one nation, yeah, one party, but power sharing. The idea of Arendt Leipart. And the balance between, on the one hand, autonomy, cultural autonomy, and political integration in the federal structure, and the guiding values and principles, therefore it's an ideology. Yeah? Federalism is also an ideology. You can protect both individual and collective rights or group rights, and instead of outright competition, or power dividing as in the concessional regimes, you have the idea of solidarity. That you do not compete all the time, yeah, for your own interests, but you say, well, we have also to take into account the welfare of the entire nation, of the entire people, of the entire state, and subsidiarity and solidarity are therefore the most important underlying principles. And this brings me to the end. The French state-nation model when you remember that French is a unitary state based on the idea of laïcité, so that federalism and power sharing are no-go under French constitutional law. And in France, you have, of course, several hundred different languages spoken in the field of civil society or in the family. But in the public sphere, you have always to use French as the only official language. And secondly, you are not allowed to show excessive religious symbols. So you have the ban of the burqa and of headscarves in the educational system since more than 20 years. And this was also upheld by the European Court of Human Rights. That the French concept of vivre ensemble, of living together, is a French constitutional principle which must be protected against women wearing the burqa in the public space. So wearing the burqa is a provocation, yeah, under French constitutional law. At the very moment we have a discussion in Austria, as you know, yeah, whether children up to the age of 14 will be allowed to wear a headscarf, yeah, in the public educational system, yes or no. And the Austrian Constitutional Court will have to decide a second time on this issue. And this is exactly the opposite model, the German model of the nation state, where ethnic difference is legally institutionalized on the basis of the nationality principle. And again, citizenship and nationality are used synonymously by all English mother tongue speakers. And this is completely different in Central and Eastern Europe. Citizenship means to be a member of the state, and nationality means to be a member of an ethnic group in Eastern Europe. And it's very often confusing, yeah, to talk to people from the United States or Great Britain, yeah. who do not take this differentiation seriously. Oh, what do you mean? Nonsense, yeah. Is the response very often when I try to explain what makes the difference. And as you could see from my historic excursus, yeah, the political function of this concept was the political unification of Germany and Italy in Central Europe. But the individual is no longer an abstract citizen, as this is the case according to its legal status in French law, but you are defined as a member in an ethnic community, and therefore equality and the legal principle of equality has also a different meaning. It's no longer equality among citizens in terms of equality before the law, but equality is, according to this ideology, reduced to the members of the ethnic group. And on this basis, you have all of a sudden, yeah, theoretically and ideologically constructed the majority-minority relation. This is a legal construction, a majority or a minority in ethnic terms. And therefore French constitutional law rejects to subscribe to Article 27 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights of the United Nations from 1966. And Article 27 argues if a minority lives in a member state of the UN, they have a right to cultural, linguistic and religious freedom. And France says this is not applicable in France. We have no minorities. Minorities do not exist in France, constitutionally speaking. We have only citizens. We have no differentiation along the lines of ethnicity, language, religion. We treat everybody equal as citizen. And you have no right, therefore, to form a political party as an ethnic party. What you have, for instance, in Croatia, Serbia, Hungary, Romania, you have also political parties which are ethnic parties. And in Bosnia, as I told you last time, all the time, you have these mono-ethnic parties of Croats, Serbs, and Bosniaks, or Muslims. Whereas in the effect in the French system is assimilation. So the name Sarkozy, of the President Sarkozy, he's of Hungarian origin, but you can become president of France, despite an Hungarian name. This is the consequence, but only if you are completely assimilated into la civilisation française. Therefore, this is again, what is the difference now between nation state and civilizational state? So the French doctrines still have the idea of a civilization, which they want to export. Also in Africa, for instance. And they wanted it to, I come to the end, they wanted also to export it to Bosnia. The French international judge sitting with me on the bench of the Constitutional Court forced the staff of the Constitutional Court to start to study French. Because he said, no, French, not only English, also French must be used in the court here. And I was completely attacked by the Austrian government that I do not claim that also German must be a language of the Constitutional Court in Bosnia. Okay, just as an anecdotal evidence, what is this thinking in civilizational terms. Yeah? Assimilation, and to come to an end, the German model ends up in ethnic cleansing and genocide. And you have the Holocaust against the Jewish population in Germany under the Nazi regime, and the latest genocide in Srebrenica in Bosnia in 1995. So these are the consequences. Huh? And therefore, and this is the end, if you are in a minority position, you have the choice between what is called from Greek mythology, between the two evils, Scylla and Charybdis. You can opt either to be assimilated, or you can opt for leaving the country at best, or to be killed. In between, what is in between? There should be minority protection, but how do we organize minority protection? This would have been now the next 3 slides, but I'm not going into the slides any longer due to the time constraints, but I will have the chance to come back to that in the classes in January. But I hope I could explain the complexity again of European history, and therefore basically the theoretical but also very existential problems if you do not belong to the majority nation. Okay, thank you so much for your patience and attention.